Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Jon Myer Podcast. Today, we're talking about healthcare and cybersecurity, from the challenges to the solutions. And joining us is Jeff Warren, the Chief Product Officer at Netwrix. Jeff, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Jeff, let's talk about it. We talk about healthcare, security, cybersecurity, solutions, and problem. And in fact, one of the biggest things always in healthcare is you see those posts, oh, this hospital was locked down for ransomware, some cool TV series been made around it, some movies and everything. But why are healthcare organizations the prime targets for cybersecurity attacks, yet so many struggle with the security gaps?
I know it almost seems like they're being picked on and singled out here, but it is true. It's a trend, right? So we see that, at Netwrix, we did a study. About 84% of healthcare organizations in the past year have been targeted with a cyber attack. So almost every healthcare organization is dealing with that. And you see the ones in the headlines that are actually successful. Many of them aren't. I think if you look at what's under the covers in a lot of these attacks, they're preying on the same type of vulnerabilities and weaknesses year after year. Limitations with identity and access management, having over-provisioned accounts, legacy systems, third-party vulnerabilities. I mean, we could unpack in each and every one of these, but a lot of times they're targeting and successfully compromising healthcare organizations through the same vulnerabilities time and time again.
I like that you mentioned multiple accounts, right? You have this account to log into, then this account to log into. Third party is a huge one because now you try to have to build trust that this third party is patching vulnerabilities that are out there. They're writing good code. They're not the ones that have multiple access, more access that's actually needed. How can a healthcare organizations actually effectively, address these issues that are out there without making so much of it complex or all the friction involved?
Yeah, I think, starting with a lot of the basics, even the third party one is a great one. We saw that kind of got a lot of traction in 2023 with the Move It breach, which didn't specifically target healthcare, but it was used as a way to get into healthcare organizations and access patient data and, sensitive information. And that was because of a weakness in a third party application. So I think for that, you need to have a program, a plan in place as you're onboarding third party software vendors. And also you need to know what you already have out there today. I think a lot of healthcare organizations don't have an up-to-date inventory of all of the third party applications and the ways that, they give access into their systems, and do a regular recurring risk assessment against that. Even though HIPAA and other regulations might say you need to do an annual risk assessment, how thorough is that? How comprehensive is that? And is it up to date as things change, like an acquisition occurs, or, the dynamics of your healthcare organization changes? Are you keeping that up to date? And again, that's just looking at the third party angle. All these other problems we're mentioning have their own version of do the basics.
Just touching on the third party a little bit more, here's the problem that I see with third party in any organization, and especially healthcare. The turnover rate of employee and personnel is quick and always happening. This person has tribal knowledge. This person says, yes, I will get to it. I will update the system that says we just purchased this third party. It never happens because they move on to another role. The third party has more access or all of your information and might be traversing to them. And now they have multiple healthcare organizations they're dealing with. And if you get access to the third party, now you're actually basically a worm. You could get out to all of these. All this takes into accountability and evaluation when doing a third party.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that worm type behavior with SolarWinds and others as well. It's easier to target down the supply chain in many cases than it is to target a specific organization, because if you're successful, then an attacker is going to infiltrate dozens or hundreds or thousands of organizations through that singular effort. So there are ways to improve it. The level of security scrutiny you put your vendors through, make sure they have their security certifications, make sure they're doing their own security diligence of penetration testing and vulnerability management of their own products. Hold your vendors to a higher level, because it is becoming a more popular way in for attackers, because they I guess get more bang for their buck. They get into more organizations through a single weakness they can identify.
Jeff, going a little bit more onto the cost benefactor, and I literally just talked about this the other day, is that you have the cost of the third party tool that's out there and be like, oh, this is cheaper. So guess what? I might go with them, but their security really sucks. Or how about internal training where you train the personnel for a potential phishing or social engineering attacks? The other thing you were talking about earlier is HIPAA. With the evolving regulations, not only HIPAA and HITECH, and if you're not familiar with HITECH, HITECH actually aims to promote the adoption of meaningful, useful healthcare information technology, like your health electronic records that are out there. And it was put in place to strengthen HIPAA rules and regulations. Let me ask you, how can organizations move beyond just meeting the basic regulatory requirements to build a truly strong and resilient security posture?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in HIPAA and high tech, but I think it's important for healthcare organizations to view that as the floor and not the ceiling. That's not where you're trying to end up. That's where you're starting off. So being compliant with HIPAA and high tech, that'll help you avoid fines, but it's not going to prevent a breach. You need to reach a little bit higher than that. And, I think there's great frameworks out there that apply across different verticals, like the NIST cybersecurity framework that encapsulate a lot of what, the HIPAA and high tech are looking to accomplish, go a little bit further, and then actually address a lot of the root causes that lead to many of these security breaches. So I would certainly encourage healthcare organizations, of course, be compliant, but look a little bit broader and look at cybersecurity frameworks that can, help you stay compliant and stay secure.
I like that you said help stay compliant and secure, but here's my concern out there is that there are cybersecurity frameworks. There's HIPAA, there's high tech, there's NIST out there. Is there just too many to try to implement? Which ones do you implement? And is it all based off of your interpretation of the goals that are trying to be? Because some are just of a suggestion that you should have this compliancy, but are not enforced in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think some do a better job than others at being prescriptive than HIPAA. They're, ramping up some of the requirements around specifically how to address things like password security and other vulnerabilities that lead to breach. Having weak passwords, having no MFA, all those things are easy entry points for an attacker. I find the NIST framework, does give pretty solid, actionable guidance to organizations. But yeah, it's ultimately up to the people sitting there and interpreting it on how far you take it. And if you have the mentality of just trying to check a box, you're never going to get the most out of these frameworks. You're only going to get, the bare minimum.
Jeff, that actually goes to my next question. Are there any security concerns that healthcare organizations are just aiming to meet the bare minimum or basic regulatory compliancy and requirements just to pass it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can rattle a lot off, but one you mentioned earlier, there's requirements around how you do things with employee training for cybersecurity awareness. And I think most organizations kind of stop at phishing. They look at how can I make sure we have phishing awareness and do some, campaigns to try to phish and see if anybody falls for it. But you need to go way beyond that with your employees. You need to look at how to address things like insider threat and people that are already within the network. And if you're only focused on phishing attacks, you're going to miss a whole variety. And I think that could be looked at for a lot of the different goals of these compliance frameworks. They're pointing you in the right direction, but again, it's the floor, not the ceiling. If you just do specifically what's asked, you're going to avoid fines. You're not going to avoid breaches.
One of the biggest things that I talked about yesterday was actually on a podcast called Insider Threats. And this podcast was around the malicious person, the negligent, and then the unsuspected, right? The person had no clue that they were being ed. If you focus on one type of training, you're going to miss all the other training. If you just do training in general for that, you're going to miss the outsider threat. There has to be a happy balance in between here where you're doing more than enough to protect your healthcare, the organizations, and you have an obligations to your patients to protect their information.
Yeah. And I would say one of the best things organizations can do, kind of back to our earlier conversation, is know your environment, know your risk, and then you can tailor, where you want to lean in harder and where you're willing to settle for just doing what's required of you. Because every organization is different. Some healthcare companies came to be through 100 different acquisitions. Some have a much simpler, ecosystem. We focus a lot on Active Directory security in my space and work with healthcare organizations that have 40 different Active Directory forests. And that's a tremendous amount of risk. Others have been around for fewer time and have just one. So I don't think there's a one size fits all type recommendation, but if you have good, ongoing risk assessment, inventory of what your critical systems are and what your potential security risks are, you can use that to make informed decisions and choose where to really lean in more.
Jeff, this would not be a conversation or podcast if we didn't talk about AI in some way. And I apologize to the audience that we have to bring this up because it's in healthcare. Jeff, the healthcare industry actually keeps adopting cloud-based. There's some great hyperscalers out there that are focusing on healthcare and the services that they provide. But AI-driven technologies, what are some of the security risks that come in with this digital transformation? And how can organizations stay ahead of the emerging threats?
Yeah. So I think, unpack that into two separate tracks, because I think the hybrid and cloud-based adoption has been something going on for a while, but still something that healthcare organizations are playing catch up on. And that's because there's a lot of productivity gains, a lot of benefits of moving your data to the cloud, not having to worry about hosting and managing and patching and updating. But sometimes the security of these systems isn't a critical part of the buying process. You're just looking at the benefits, the cost savings, the simplification that it gives you. But if you don't have the staff on board to understand those cloud systems, and they move fast, you're using AWS or Azure, those things are coming up with new features, things are moving around and changing underneath you in a much different way than traditional on-premise systems did, which you were manually updating and choosing your own pace. The cloud is different. It moves at a much faster pace. And if you don't have the staff to keep up with that, you're not going to be able to keep your data secure there. So, that's one thing I see on the cloud adoption side. We did a study, I'm going to paraphrase it, but, about 50% of the breaches that we looked at over the past year involved cloud misconfigurations, just not knowing how to turn the right knobs and dials on the security of the cloud infrastructure to keep it safe. Everybody's seen the big name, open S3 bucket leaks that were indexed on Google. Those have mostly gone away, but there's subtler versions of that make the data you put in the cloud way more accessible to attackers and easier to share outside your organization. So you need to kind of keep on top of it. And then we can talk about AI in a minute.
Jeff, let's just jump right to AI, because we talked about the cloud base, and a lot of the cloud providers are offering not only AI-driven technology, but you can use your own AI-driven technology, which complicates things.
Yes. So shadow AI, right? Like we see it everywhere. I mean, even at Netwrix, it was starting to crop up. But a lot of the organizations we deal with, people are using their own AI for their own purposes. And there's a lot of risks to that. In healthcare, you have to be very careful what you're putting into these public AI models. You don't want patient data or employee data going into public AI models. That can be a HIPAA violation right there. There are secure ways to do it, but I would recommend having an AI council, setting standards and policies on what secure AI use is, what tools are allowed, and then go and enforce that those are the only tools used. But you want to encourage and lean into the desire to gain benefits out of AI. So I think it's just most important to get ahead of it and offer people AI tools that are approved by your company, that they can get the benefits out of, or they're probably going to find ways to, get around that because they're used to AI in their personal lives so much now, helping them with just about everything they do. They need a version they can use, to be productive at work. And it's up to healthcare security to provide them a secure way to do that.
The next thing is AI training, being aware of not only the AI that you're using at home for personal use, but don't use that same AI internally for your company and use, because people don't realize once you type into that prompt, your data is out there. Yeah. The information that you copy and paste in there, your data is out there, is being used to train the next model. there should be some training involved in what type of data you should put in there. But there are some cool AI tools that are coming out that will see what you're putting in and will not send that data externally, noting that that data is personalized to you, which is actually pretty cool, which would be great for healthcare, cybersecurity. Like, don't put it out there. And I think some of the companies should have an internal AI to be utilized. And then when they go through and process that data, it is scrubbed for anything else before it goes out externally.
Yeah. So we could do a whole session on this, but I would say, understanding the difference between public and private LLMs is a great place to start, because you don't want to use the ones you're using for personal life. But there are ways to roll out a private LLM that would feel very similar to what you're using. Yep. And that data is not going into the public model. So there's security boundaries you can put right off the bat around that. And then, layered on top of that, there are solutions, there's tools that provide that kind of DLP layer in front of the LLM. So it will not accept inputs or provide outputs that violate, privacy regulations. So no patient data is going in, no sensitive data is going back out to the user who issued the prompt. And we've seen these concerns kind of explode recently with tools like Microsoft's Copilot on Microsoft 365. All of a sudden, users are entering prompts and getting back data they probably shouldn't have seen, but because the access wasn't really tight, they technically had access to, and the AI is just making it super accessible. So I think AI training is big, but just providing secure AI tooling, is going to be what gives you the biggest benefit.
Oh, Jeff, I think we can do an entire segment just on entering a prompt and getting back data that you should not have received. If you were to actually go to that, an example that I would have, and before I ask my last question, is that you put in this prompt, you are an IT engineer and you want to know the financial records of your company. If you put it in, all of a sudden they pop up. Should you really know that information? No, but on normal circumstances, I can't click on it, but my AI prompt just gave it to me. And Jeff, we will open up a whole can of worms if we go into that. My last question, we talked about training, not only training for cloud-based, training for AI, but what and how important is it to actually have the proper skill sets for cloud and AI?
Yeah, it's very important. And I think it's important for healthcare organizations to decide what cloud and what AI they want to make available, to kind of put some boundaries around what skill sets you want to make sure that you have in-house, what training you need to provide to your staff. Are you going to be a multi-cloud healthcare organization using AWS, Azure, GCP? If so, that's going to take more investment in training, more investment in skills. Are you going to, focus more on a single cloud provider or a single AI tool? And you can, then accordingly plan out your training, education, and tooling around that. I think most people become accidental multi-cloud companies so often, yep. And then they build an application that's back-ended in S3 over here, and hey, I can't get rid of this, but we don't have the staff to understand AWS identity and access management policies and write custom JSON definitions. So all of a sudden, you're left, scrambling to keep these systems secure. So figure out what you need, standardize on it, and then, set your path from there.
Talk about the inherited security and the complexity of your ecosystem and environment. Jeff, thank you so much for your time.
John, thank you. It was great being here.
Well, everybody, this was the Jon Myer Podcast, and we were talking about healthcare and cybersecurity, not only the challenges and solutions. Joining us today was Jeff Warren, the Chief Product Officer at Netwrix. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notify, because guess what? We're out of here.